Happy Frigg's Day. Today I want to talk about Odinn and Loki being blood brothers. Now this subject came up in brief in the interview on YouTube between Jackson Crawford and Carolyn Larrington, who are two heavyweights, shall we say, in the translation of Norse, the Poetic Edda, etc. And quite interesting to watch and various things. And one of the things that came up was obviously that during the poem Lokasenna, when Loki is having a go at everyone, Frigg mentions along the lines of, we should not talk about the early days, because Loki has said, demanding a seat in the hall, that Odin swore he would not take a drink unless Loki was there to share in the taking of the drink. And obviously this brings into question, how did this oath come about? What ties Odin and Loki together so sort of tightly that Odin will tolerate to great lengths the things that Loki does? And obviously by the time we get to Lokasenna, I think Loki has pushed that button too much, because obviously come the end of the poem, the Aesir hunt down, capture and imprison Loki, because Loki has crossed the line with the death of Balder. What I've had the theory for a long time, and I'm going to go over that just with some added extra detail, because as I've been thinking about it this morning, there's just that there's a couple of extra bits, a bit of flavour that you can add to that, as to why there is this alliance. And obviously with the prophecy of Völuspá, we know that Loki will lead the Jotnar at Ragnarok. What I do want to say is this is what I consider a plausible explanation, because there is nothing written that says this is what happens. It's more a case of, as I am wont to do, is to look into the blank spaces and see how they possibly connect up. Because if we go back to, Völuspá and sort of really the creation of the Aesir and Asgard, Odin and his brothers murder Ymir. And I want to add into one of the things I've been thinking about regarding this is, until they become Aesir, they're all Jotnar. And Ymir is plausibly the Allfather. And Odin and his two brothers murder Ymir and set order into sort of the 9 realms. That doesn't exist until this moment. And then sort of restrictions are put on Jotunheim and the realms, etc., etc. And the thing that fascinates me is we are told that the first war is between the Aesir and the Vanir, not the Aesir and the Jotnar. Because really, the Jotnar have every reason to go, we're not having this. This is a blood vendetta. You've killed our Allfather, and this will not rest. But of course, that doesn't happen. And my theory is that at this time, what would prevent that war? What would prevent what would satisfy these two factions not going to war? Herein, I think, is the cause for Odinn and Loki being blood brothers. Loki supports Odinn's actions. I mean, it is a massive change, and if Loki represents change, then this is a massive act of change. I think this is when Odinn can claim the title Allfather, as he becomes known, having been perhaps the chief force behind Ymir's murder. And Loki is a part of that. That the reason that the Jotnar do not take up arms. I mean, you can take into consideration that, the Jotnar, survivors of the Jotnar following all this massive creation, are one, perhaps too focused on trying to stay alive, and two, massively intimidated. They are fair things to add into a consideration. However, I think really there's a certain fair plausibility that in those early days, Odinn, with his cunning, made arrangements to prevent any war against his people, the Aesir, by making deals. We also have to think, or tie into this, that at what point is Thorborn of Odinn and Jord, who I think is plausible also that Jord represents the Vanir in a early stage as Mother Earth, and by making all the rules, if you like, the structure that is in place by the murder of Ymir, that there's cause really for provocation between what happens and comes from the Vanir and the Aesir. And there's a reason why perhaps Thor is intolerant to clever words and a meaningless war. For me, that would explain a necessity for Odinn and Loki being blood brothers. I mean, there are no other explanations. There are no explanations at all. And while this theory has no support in written evidence or the written stories, it just makes, for me personally, a lot of sense. It also, as Loki gets increasingly frustrated, perhaps with the Aesir, the death of Balder is the vendetta paid to some extent. It's Odin remains the Allfather, but taking away his son is a measure of increasing or the culmination of discontent in Loki and the way Loki is treated. And as I've said previously, really, even after that, Odin is still tolerant of Loki. It's just Loki has to push things. Personally, I think when you look at the other stories in the Poetic Edda, I feel that when we get to Lokasenna, Odin expects Loki to say what Loki says, and lets Loki hang themselves by their actions. It's almost as though Loki needs attention and Odin has not given him attention, or has refused to give Loki attention until the attention has to be given. Really, it's a no-win situation for Odin. Odin knows that Loki will lead the Jotnar at Ragnarok. And how do you deal with that? It comes in very much to the understanding people around you and hoping that they will act of their own free will, but are driven by their nature, and you understand their nature, so you hope that they won't do what is their nature to do, and yet you know inevitably they're going to do these things. And thus the path is set. So really, I think the binding act of being blood brothers between Odin and Loki is Loki's cooperation to pacify the Jotnar when Odin and his brothers kill Ymir and set rules and structure in place in the 9 realms. You can agree or disagree, and that's fine. It just is a plausible logic as far as I'm concerned. Let me know what you think. Thank you very much. Do take care. Goodbye.